From the birth of social media to becoming among some of the earliest adopters of cryptocurrency, the Winklevoss twins have always been on the forefront of disruptive new technology and innovation. And as a result, they have seen their net worth skyrocket into the billions. In their latest interview, they speak on the two cryptocurrencies they are most bullish on, Bitcoin and Ethereum, and why these are their highest conviction investments. In particular, they speak on why they think Ethereum has unlimited potential and the catalyst that is ETH 2.0, and they also give their insight on crypto regulation. Make sure to stick around to the end of the video where they give their end of year price predictions.
We love Ethereum as well. We're big hodlers in Ether and Bitcoin. And I guess for some people, like Bitcoin's easier to understand as like digital gold.
Right.
And if you look at the market cap of gold, I think it's like $9 trillion. So if you look at the market cap of Bitcoin and it overtakes gold, you can sort of do the math. And we think it's like a 10x from here at the minimum. And we actually wrote a piece last summer when Bitcoin was at 13,000 called The Case for $500,000 Bitcoin.
Right.
And so we're up 5x from last summer, but we still got 10x to go before Bitcoin overtakes gold. But I think Ethereum is this sort of creative design space, a decentralized operating system, and it's sort of unbounded. Like, how can you put a sort of a upper bound on the size of this space where you can just create and build all kinds of decentralized apps and things on top of it. So given that you're like a more creative person and you gravitate towards Ether, that makes actually a lot of sense to me. I think people who like have spent a lot of time, let's say on Wall Street or in financial markets, might gravitate first to Bitcoin because they're like, oh, this is a fixed hard asset. It makes a lot of sense to them. Ether is shifting to proof of stake, which is a different consensus mechanism. And I think that's going to really increase the transaction throughput, the scale, and decrease the costs and the gas fees. So it's making strides in that direction. And I think the short answer is yes. Like we're very bullish on Ether. It's got a huge community, great developers behind it. They're going to figure it out. Buy and hold and maybe don't look at it month to month or year to year if you have trouble sort of watching the gyrations of the market, because it is a volatile market. But I think it's all about holding this sort of digital real estate or digital value. And nobody really makes money like day trading or trading in and out of things, because it's just like too hard to time and nobody can predict the future.
Right.
I mean, there's a big sell-off in March during the early part of the pandemic. I think Bitcoin got down to like under $4,000, and I think a lot of people sold. And it's like, here we are at $45,000. So you just have to sort of set it and forget it. That's really the only strategy to play these assets. Just like you would want to go, if we were talking in the late 90s, you'd want to go long Google, long Amazon, and literally hold them for 25 years, not trade in and out.
The mistake was not buying them or selling them.
Don't try and time the market, like just and it's one of those things. I think people they look at Bitcoin and are like, oh my gosh, it's at 45,000. I saw it at 10,000. Now it's too expensive or whatever. It's all just this mental construct. But if you just sort of get in it a little bit and feel it and get comfortable, dip your like toe in the water, that's really the way to do it.
Yeah, like Bitcoin is a store of value. It's a hedge to inflation. So like when the Fed prints all this money, the $100 you have is less scarce. So it's losing power. So it's better to put that value in something like gold or Bitcoin, or maybe an investment like Amazon that actually appreciates. Because if you put cash in your mattress, over time, you're losing a lot of value. So that's the appeal to Bitcoin. Product is very sticky and has a lot of like product market fit, a lot of users and momentum. Something has to be like 10x better for people to switch. Ethereum has a huge first mover advantage. It's on every major exchange. When people build stablecoins, like Gemini's built the Gemini dollar, a stablecoin, you start building it on Ethereum. There's so much building that's been happening there. that like that's where you want to go because that's where eyeballs are. The thing that has to happen though is scalability and throughput. Its ability to process like many transactions cheaply. So right now, because that migration, so Ethereum 2.0 or Ethereum 2 is promises to solve this, and that migration is happening. But right now, there can be so much excitement that if things get hot or Ethereum can fall victim to the weight of its own success. So transaction prices go through the roof when there's a lot of activity and people are moving through different projects. So if it doesn't scale or make that migration successfully, which I do believe it will, then that could be a problem.
And just to build on that, Tyler, to take like the other side of Ethereum, it's sort of theirs to lose. If you look at the operating space, there are a few major operating systems around the world. You've got OS, iOS, Android, Linux, Windows. So it's not just sort of one operating system. There are, network effects for sure, but we do see a couple of really big systems, at least in computing. And so it is possible that some newer layer one protocol says, hey, we're going to start at proof of stake. We're going to make a better smart contract language. It's easier to program, more secure. I think Tezos is an example of a project that launched with these things from day one. It hasn't had the same uptake, at least yet, as Ethereum. Maybe Solana's up there as well. I'm not as familiar with that project, but I think that there's going to be opportunities for other people to enter the race with potentially a 10x better project. But I think in my mind, it's a question between Ether winning all or winning a very, very big chunk of an enormous pie. I think it's in either case, it's an incredible long-term hold. The question is how incredible, what varying degree of incredible. Right, 5,000, 5 to 10 feels like a reasonable range towards year end. And I guess if we're currently at Ethereum's maybe 50% market cap of Bitcoin, and we think Bitcoin's a 10x from here, I see no reason to believe that Ethereum isn't at least a 10x sort of lockstep.
Right.
And maybe quite frankly, a lot more to my previous comments about how do you put a bound on this type of innovation and creativity? You really can't. So there's a psychology here. Like I remember when Bitcoin broke 50,000, it was like hovering at like 48, 49 and we're humans, right? So there's psychology. I think if Ether breaks 5,000, it just feels psychologically like a really interesting inflection point.
People like round numbers.
Yeah, people like round numbers. Then at 10,000, people's heads are going to explode. Yeah. So look, we love both these projects. They're incredible, and I think that they'll probably move lockstep in many ways. But right now, the focus has been on Ether. It's super hot, and you could argue that it was not there in large part because people were really focusing on Bitcoin during the early, half of the pandemic and inflation. And I think that will come back and it will just sort of go between the two.
We've always sort of been engaged with key stakeholders, and we're definitely going to continue to engage because there's definitely people who believe in crypto and the innovation. And I think it's important to always have those dialogues. But sort of how this all went down was a bit disappointing on some level when there was such an obvious win-win pass. I think we're ultimately going to get to a good place because I think even if the original language stays in there, judges can interpret it, the IRS can sort of interpret it as well and create guidance around it. So I don't think all is lost, but I do think it sort of exposes that government leaves a lot to be desired, and that's why we're so kind of excited about Bitcoin and decentralized money and decentralized protocol, because it's sort of built into the code and it's permissionless, and you're not subject to the whims of humans. And the Federal Reserve is like a board of 12 people that meet behind closed doors and then publish their minutes later, and you're not in that room. There's no room in Bitcoin. It's all open source code. And I think that like, this is the same government. We just watched Saigon 2.0. We've been in Afghanistan for 21 years and we couldn't figure out a way to like orderly exit in a graceful manner to sort of like protect the people that work with us and whatever. Like we literally had 20 years to figure that out. And here we are at Saigon 2.0. And I tweeted about this yesterday. I'm like, this is the same government that you trust to manage your money.
Are we ahead of where you thought we would be? Are we on track?
It was 2012. And so we've been sort of in it for, going on almost a decade. And
wow.
I guess it's like one of those things where in some ways, like, we believed in this was our vision sort of the future. I think in some ways we're ahead of where we thought we'd be, in some ways behind. I think like we were thinking, in 2014, 15 and 16, there was a lot of chatter that like Wall Street's coming into Bitcoin, and it really did not happen. And it's totally fine because it's been very much an individual revolution, and Bitcoin, at least in our view, is all about empowering the individual. It's really why we built Gemini to get people into the Bitcoin world, and this alternative system that we believe creates greater choice, independence, and opportunity. I think once you don't have alternatives, or you're locked into a system or jailed into it, that's really not great for the individual and empowerment. And so, look, I think in some ways it's amazing to see sort of what's happened, and it's at times surreal. Sometimes you wake up and you're like, wow, this has actually happened. You're in a big way. But there's the other part of me says like, we're so early. I mean, I want to use a baseball metaphor, but I know I need to use like a cricket, like the first wicket or whatever. We're literally just getting started. We're like 1/10 of the way to the $10 trillion market cap. Oh, and then you look at what's happening to the dollar, the Fed, the debt burdens, the money spending, the money printing that's been happening before the pandemic for the last decade. And then what's been happening to get us through that. So you see what's happening over here. You see Elon Musk doing this, Jack Dorsey making these moves over there. It starts to become completely irresponsible not to at least have a story. Like maybe your positions were not ready, but you have to have thought about it. I think if you have cash on your balance sheet, if you're a CEO, and I actually think that like, this, I can't remember if it was last year or this year, but the corporate treasury putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet started, right? At some point, those dominoes will continue to fall. And like Cameron said, Fortune 500 companies, all of them will have something, right? And then at some point, a central bank will fall. Central banks, their muscle memory has been to stack gold. Even when they say everything's happening, everything's fine, this is normal, all this money printing, no big deal, nothing to see here. Don't listen to what they say, look at what they do. And their balance sheets, they've been stacking gold. Okay, so that behavior, doesn't indicate that everything's okay to me, right? Because they're getting this hard money. And then they'll discover that the hardest money in the galaxy is Bitcoin. So at some point, there will be a central bank that starts putting Bitcoin on its balance sheet. So when you think of, and then it's just bananas, right? And when you think of how early we are in the corporate treasuries doing this, and then the fact that central banks will do this because this behavior, they do it with gold. And if you do it with gold, you are going to do it. It's not an if, it's a when. I see a path to 10 trillion very easily. But as we know, Bitcoin's a lot more than just a metal. An open source project, gold built for the internet, it can do so much more. So, we published that thought piece of the case for 500,000 Bitcoin, but it's conservative. It could be a lot more. Yeah, and look, I think there's also like even some intermediate steps, right? There's pension funds, and then there's sovereign wealth funds, which are sort of a proxy the state would be like the LP of that, or the central bank. I'm sure they all have slightly different structures, but there are some really innovative and brilliant sovereign wealth funds out there. Singapore, Temasek, and all that stuff. These guys and gals are all long. They're long tech. They understand that. They're out on the curve, on the frontier. So it's just really a matter of time. But it's going to be mad dashes, as Tyler mentioned. I mean, I every once in a while I remind people on Twitter that there's only 21 million Bitcoin, and there's 46 million millionaires on the planet right now. There's not a full Bitcoin to go around. You don't want to be the millionaire who's not in that 21 million bucket. Then you're no longer going to be a millionaire, right? And it's like being at a party, the music stops. You got to find that seat, and buying Bitcoin is like buying a pro rata seat on this network of money, the store of value network, and really time is of the essence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One other thing is you're starting to see a lot of these big banks like Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Boney get into Bitcoin. That's all driven by their customers. Their private wealth customers are seeing what's happening with the price of Bitcoin. They're like, how do I get exposure? They're like, we don't know. We don't know how to do it.
All the announcements coming out are that these banks are allowing their wealthy clients to buy Bitcoin. It's not. That's the announcement.
They're freaking out because the wealthy clients are seeing they're seeing the price of Bitcoin, the best performing asset of the last decade. It's going to be the best this decade, and they can't touch it. So that's driving it. That's what drives all these banks. Is ultimately it's the business case and the demand from their customers. And so, yeah, as the price keeps going up, like everybody's like, what are we doing here? The risk is sitting on the sidelines. The risk is doing nothing. I think that's the ultimate. Like that's the people are like, oh, how do you get comfortable with Bitcoin, holding Bitcoin? Like, how do you get comfortable not holding Bitcoin? Like that's so much more risky. I would never take that bet over the last decade or the next decade or the one thereafter. So like, and that the way I think about it, the way you think about it, Peter, the way Cameron thinks about it, that's rapidly becoming the way everyone thinks about it. They're like, wait, I don't have chips on the table. That's kind of reckless and insane.
Bitcoin's a simple idea when you boil it down. It's go long the future of store of value money, the future, reserve currency. Yes, you're gonna literally hodl it for years. Don't look at it, and you're gonna ask someone to collect a fee on that advice. It's kind of a hard sell. And so I think a lot of the resistance sometimes is this baked in belief of diversification and portfolio construction, and people making those straightforward, simple bets on the future sometimes become elusive in those environments. So I think that's part of it. And I think there may be a belief that, a little bit of a resistance, right? In people who have been in capital markets for 20 years and they sort of climbed the mountain, they learned, became experts at what they do. And then all of a sudden there's this new thing over here, and it requires you to walk down the mountain and learn again, and stomaching that and becoming like a beginner, a total noob where you can't just reach back on years of experience. It's very humbling. I mean, I get humbled by Bitcoin on a daily basis.